This is the Art Beauty Podcast, where we are always reaching for truth and beauty. Remember, the brands on the show are not paying to be here, so we get to ask them the questions that you want answered because you deserve to be informed so you can make the best choices for yourself. With that said, I'm Amber. Today, my fabulous co-host is Chris Mirabile. He is the founder of NOVOS. He is a biohacker, has an incredible story, an entrepreneur, a brain tumor survivor. So we are going to hear all about his journey. And then also he's going to tell us a little bit about aging and this concept of aging and biohacking, which I know that you are as interested in as I am. So with that said, we got a lot to cover today. Let's get right into it. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Amber. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I have to say, before we even get started, you have such an incredible background. Could you maybe tell a little bit about why you were so interested in health in the first place?
Sure. Well, it actually all began when I was 12 years old. I saw an issue of Men's Health magazine at the bookstore, and I decided at that moment that I needed to focus on my health. I wanted to be attractive to the girls in school, so I started exercising and eating a healthy diet at 12 years old. Yes.
Okay.
And I did it every single day. I'd come home from school and I would do pull-ups on the pull-up bar that my father installed in our basement. And then it was all the more shock to me that when I was 16 years old, I suddenly had a seizure while out on a school trip in New York City. And it turned out that it was caused by a brain tumor. And so that was the moment where my thinking completely shifted. And my perception of health evolved from one that was the superficial side of health, of trying to be attractive and play sports well, to to one in which I understood that health was more complex than that. It was biology and avoidance of disease. And so that's when I decided that it would be important for me to try to focus on never laying in a hospital bed again, contemplating mortality, at least until my final days, hopefully at a very long time from then. And that started my journey. It planted the seed for what is now essentially what I've created with NOVOS.
I mean, so at 16 years old to have such a brush with mortality, it certainly is life-changing. For anybody who's out there, before we kind of move on, do you have advice or something that kind of got you through that time?
It's for me, I made a conscious decision to look at the experience as a gift, from which I could learn, see aspects of life that others don't have the ability to see, or at least won't see until much later in their lives. So I tried to find all of the positives that I could and reframe the experience rather than from a victim mindset of like, why me? And the ways in which it may have hurt me, instead into an empowered mindset of what can I take out of this experience and what can I do with that? How can I live a better life as a result of this?
Now, was that recovery, and I'm only asking, I had a good friend who also at a very young age had a brain tumor, and it was a really tough recovery. I mean, he lost a lot of his speech, walking ability, which now has come back, but to be honest, not 100%. What was that like for you?
For me, fortunately, I didn't really have that many long-term side effects. I'd say that the number one was my memory. It was shot. I remember the first year. This was going into SATs for college, and I had a tutor who asked me to repeat a sentence that she had just read to me, and I couldn't repeat the sentence. It was literally 2 seconds later, and I could not repeat the sentence. That's how bad my memory was. And I had gone from doing very well in school and being in advanced classes to now being, literally at the bottom of the rung, like struggling to even just remember a sentence. So it was really humbling. And it taught me, excuse me, it really taught me, it showed me another side of life of disability and not being capable, and really just opened my mind up in so many different ways, made me more empathetic, and that lasted for a while. Memory for years probably, but the first year in particular, especially with all of the anti-seizure medication that I was prescribed that first year, it really slowed me down a lot.
I mean, I got to be honest, talking to you now and seeing you've had some tremendous successes. I know you've also had some tremendous losses. Um, I want to be mindful of the time here, but I will say that you
Sure.
should check out some of your other podcasts that you've been on, because you really have just an incredible entrepreneurial journey to get to where you are now. Super inspiring. But
Thank you.
you wouldn't be able to tell that you had all of this hardship early on. So, in terms of this idea and sort of jumping forward, when you became interested in sort of what can I do today to sort of take control of my health? We've heard a lot about this difference between a biological age and chronological age, and that we can actually sort of have a biological age that's younger than our chronological age. For people who might not have be familiar with that, can you explain what that is? What our biological age is? What our chronological ages, and how we can sort of tell the difference?
Sure. So chronological age is what we're all familiar with when we say, how old are you, right? That's how many birthdays you've had. Biological age is something related to how old our biological systems are, our cellular integrity, their capacities and capabilities. And essentially that then leads to things like your disease risk, your mortality risk, and your ability to perform functions. Now, I'll drive it home for people. I think that people can really relate to this concept, this idea of everyone knows that 50-year-old who looks like they're 65 or 70, and everyone knows that 50-year-old who looks like they're 40 or even maybe in their late 30s. And you question, like, how is it possible that that person is looking so young? And when you put those two people next to each other, the older looking and younger looking person, that's really a good picture of someone that most likely had an accelerated biological pace of aging and someone who had a decelerated biological pace of aging. What most people don't realize is, I think people just assume this is genetics, like that person got lucky or they have really good genes. The fact is that researchers have found that 90% of your pace of aging is actually based on your lifestyle and environment. It is not based on your genetics. It's only 10% of the equation. It's a little bit more maybe for like super centenarians, people who live to 120 years old, but for the vast majority of us, it's actually only 10% or less that is coming from genetics. So I think that that's important. It's empowering. It's for people to realize you actually can do something about this. So those of us who are proactive people who like to take charge in our lives and create the lives that we want for ourselves, that's really important information, because now you can actually do something about it and slow down the pace of aging.
So for people who are out there wondering, like, well, wait a minute, I feel super young. How can I actually tell what my biological age is? What are our options out there?
That's a great question. So there's multiple different ways to do it. Scientists, this is cutting edge science right now. This is literally like I went to a science event just a month ago, and researchers are presenting their newest biological age clocks straight out of the university. So uh, typically, they're measuring what's known as your epigenome. Now, it's not always measuring the epigenome, but those are the most promising, the most researched biological age clocks in existence right now. And your epigenome is the layer that sits right next to your genome or your genetics, right? So everyone's familiar with genes at this point. But what most people aren't familiar with is that you have an epigenome, which is which genes are turned on and off. So if your genes are the piano keys, the epigenome is the piano player determining which genes or keys to play, right? And so as you age, maybe when you're young, the tune that's being played is, Tchaikovsky, right? It's a symphony. And then as you age, certain keys are incorrectly pressed, or they're missing the beat, missing the rhythm, right? So you're pressing the wrong keys or you're missing keys, and it no longer sounds like that perfect symphony when you were younger. And there are patterns to this, specific genes in particular, that these algorithms that these scientists are creating can identify. And based on your biological age, so essentially, again, your risk of a disease and or mortality, they're able to create these algorithms that will then tell you your equivalency. So if you are, for example, I can talk about myself actually with this. So I'm
Yeah, time to
39.
brag. Time to brag. And I'll tell you why I'm saying brag in a minute, but yes, okay.
So a humble brag. So yeah, I'm 39 years old biologically. Sorry, chronologically, but biologically, I'm more than 13 years younger than that, according to not just one biological age clock, but I've done about a dozen of them, and I've taken the average of those.
Okay.
So that's basically, and there's reason for that, because some clocks are more accurate than others, and we can talk about that if you care to. But there's like third generation clocks that are the most accurate, and then there are first generation clocks that people are, or companies are also selling, that are not particularly accurate. But sorry, go ahead if you have a
Yeah.
question.
So for everybody who's listening out there, I mean, look, I have to be. I'm turning 44 next week. I feel pretty good. I feel young. I took one of these tests, and I was convinced there's no way that I'm aging at a rate equivalent to my chronological age, but it was. It was exactly one. I was aging, my pace of aging was one, which means I am chronologically well, at the time I took it 43 and biologically 43. I was really bummed out about that. I got to be honest. And now in terms of the tests, I took one that was a saliva based test. I know that NOVOS has one, and I was looking into this today. That's a blood. You do a little drop of blood and you send that in. Do you think that there's difference in the accuracy there?
Yes, there definitely is. So blood-based tests, as you might suspect, are more accurate than saliva-based tests. And so the blood-based test that we offer, you just prick your finger and then you spread it on an index card within a little circle, and then you ship that back to us. We offer 3 different tests in our kit. So it's called NOVOS Age, and within our kit, we've got the Dunedin Pace Clock, which is the most advanced biological age clock out there right now. It was created by researchers at Columbia and Duke universities. We license it from them. And this is telling you your rate of aging right now. So a 1, as you mentioned before, would mean every 1 chronological year, you're aging 1 biological year. Ideally, you get that to be less than 1. Mine, for example, is 0.69. So that implies I'm aging 31% slower than the average person is per year. And we can talk about how I believe I achieved that if you'd like to later on. But that's the first test. And we think that this is the most important one, because this is telling you your trajectory right now. Based
Right.
on your lifestyle, are you accelerating your aging, like maybe aging 1.2, so 20% faster than average, or are you aging slower than average? And this is also one of the most sensitive tests to change. So in as little as 3 to 6 months, based on your lifestyle changes, you can then see those scores changing. The second test we offer is biological age. That is less sensitive to change. There are other companies out there as well selling biological age clocks. They're not as accurate and as precise as that pace of aging is quite yet. So we tell our customers to take it with a grain of salt. If you're looking at the kit overall, we say put 85% of your focus on the Dunedin Pace Clock, and maybe 5 to 10% in the biological age, and that's going to include accumulated aging throughout your lifetime. Like maybe you had a traumatic childhood, for example, has been found to accelerate aging, and that could be found even in the later decades of your life. And then the third test that we offer is telomere length. This is included in that NOVOS Age kit. And telomeres are the end caps of your chromosomes. They protect your DNA. And those get shorter every time your cells divide. But they can also be lengthened by different foods and healthy habits and so on. And so for this test, it's not a direct marker of your biological age, but what you want to make sure of is that your telomeres don't get too short.
Right.
If they get too short, then you have a higher risk of different diseases of aging, like certain forms of cancer and so on. So it's more of a check off the box. They're not too short. Okay, I can rest easy at night. So those are the 3 tests that we offer in our NOVOS Age kit.
I want to go back to something you said before because, I keep it real with everybody here. I'm super fascinated in this, but I think, in the general, society, this is a little bit fringe still, right? This idea of biohacking, this idea of,
Mhm.
being able to sort of manipulate our biological age and sort of turn back our biological age is something that, not if you're a billionaire tech person, right? They're doing it all the time. But for the most of us, this is relatively new. And it does come at a cost, right? So these tests are not inexpensive. They're what, ballpark $300?
If you
$400?
buy two kits, it's $300 per kit from us. If you
Okay.
buy just one, it's $349.
Okay. So, it's certainly something that, but I always say you're
Costs will
investing in
come
your health.
down.
You're right.
Costs will
Right.
come down in the future, right? So just like any other technology, when you first start, the cost is higher, and as time progresses, the cost will go down. And we'd like to provide that to customers. But to your point about tech billionaires and trying to hack their aging, that's what the press loves to cover. But we as a company, Novos, we're a public benefit corporation. With my childhood experience or my teenage experience, it's very important to me to be able to offer to the public the ability to, first of all, the knowledge to understand that
Right.
aging is in your hands. You can control the rate at which you are aging within certain limitations, of course. um, and with that knowledge, give you free ways to be able to slow down your aging. So to the point about the expense of the biological age kit, yes, of course, like if you are really getting into it, you might want to make that investment. But even if you don't, we provide very practical guidelines for things that you can do in your everyday life, from your diet to your exercise to your sleep routine to your management, and go down the list of the things that science has shown
Right.
exhibit positive effects on your biological age and biological rate of aging. And you can do that completely for free on our website. In fact, something that your listeners might be really interested in is we offer a free tool called Face Age.
Right.
And this is you take a selfie, it's AI powered, and the artificial intelligence is going to evaluate your selfie and tell you how young your face looks, how young your eye age is, and then other skin health markers like wrinkles, skin redness, pore size, etc. And then we give you practical guidance for improving all of those scores. And you can track this over time, of course, right? So that's one thing that a lot of people are really interested in. And then we also have on our website a quiz that you can access at the top of the website, where you just answer a questionnaire, and then we give you personalized recommendations for what you, based on your lifestyle, need to focus on most to slow
Right.
down your pace of aging. None of this costs a cent. We pay for it out of our pocket as a public benefit corporation. And then, of course, we hope some of you turn into customers. But regardless, we want to provide this to the public.
I want to backtrack on what I said before. So I will say, like, I did one of these biological tests, not from Novos, although I am interested in trying yours out because the one that I did was a saliva based, but it did give markers for various areas. So my brain, my liver, my metabolism of where that biological age was, and I will tell you, it it was good enough to start me on the road to some better habits. So like my liver was a little bit older. Well, guess what? You've heard me talk about it, like those nightly tequila drinks. I had to give those up. That was kind of a bummer. But so it's good to kind of have that as a marker for good behavior. I think if you're ready to sort of take on some sort of a big change in your life, if you're about to embark on a fitness journey, if maybe you had some sort of a health scare that you need to change your behaviors, I always think it's a great idea to kind of have this as a baseline. And then how often do people normally take these? Is it every 6 months, every year, every 2 years?
So if we were trying to maximize profit, we would say take it every 3 months. But the
Okay.
truth is, I suggest that everyone consider taking it once a year.
Okay.
The reason being that you have to think of yourself as an N equals one scientific experiment, N being number of participants, right? Like one participant in this scientific experiment, and that participant is you. So um, you have a very different lifestyle in the winter, let's just say before Christmas, than you do in the summer, let's say for July 4th weekend, right? And different amounts of time outdoors with UV radiation, physical exercise, different diets, different drinking habits, different stress levels. Go down the list. And those are known in science as confounding factors. These can all kind of mess up the results uh, and lead you to false conclusions, like, oh, maybe the lifestyle that I changed to, or the product that I'm using, the supplement I'm using, isn't working. Well, no, maybe it's actually that you're a lot more stressed this time of year, or you're not physically active enough, right? So to minimize confounding factors, we suggest that you take the test at the same time the following year. Now, if budget permits, of course, you can take it once every 6 months or once every 3 months. I wouldn't do it more often than once every 3 months. But once a year, I think, is a healthy balance to for budget and for the value that you can get out of taking the test.
Now, given that you just said, it's lifestyle, maybe you don't want to do this on January 1st, right? So for all of my
Right.
people who are like, I'm starting something new, but coming out of those holidays when you're probably, drinking, partying, maybe eating foods that you don't eat, maybe not the best time to take it.
Yeah, probably take it when it's like a better depiction of what your real life actually is. Um, Now, the needle's not going to move in just like a day or two of unhealthy eating. And so if you're like me, I eat pretty healthy most of the time, but then for Christmas, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, I might eat unhealthy. But I'm not doing that for weeks. I'm doing it for a
Right.
day or two. That's not really going to move the needle on the test. But for others who might like not eat healthy and exercise for the whole month of December, let's say, yeah, maybe wait a little bit longer. Also, keep in mind that if you were recently very sick, like you had COVID or the flu, you probably want to wait at least a month before you take the test, because your immune system and the inflammation in your body might have an impact on the results as well, which is not commonly talked about, but it's something that we suggest to customers.
That's great to know. So given this, now that we've covered the fact that we can have a different biological age, that we can control that to some degree, what are some of the things that we can be doing to sort of turn back that biological clock?
Yeah, so first let's start with diet, and eating in general. So meal timing is being understood as a very significant impact on your health, almost as much as the foods themselves. Not quite as much, but almost as much. So uh, so when I say meal timing, you may have heard of something called intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
Technically, it's time restricted feeding, if you want to be accurate about the term for it. So, time restricted feeding is eating only within a certain time slot each day. And so, what you'll oftentimes hear is a ratio, like, for example, 16-8. That's what
Right.
I follow. So 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating. So that would mean, for example, eating only between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. This is something that's very doable for most people. You don't eat the first thing when you wake up, or if you do, then you finish your last bite earlier in the evening,
Right.
and you go longer without food. So trying to compress that window to approximately 16-8 would be a really healthy move. Um, Fasting is another thing to consider. Now, I would only suggest fasting to people who are in proper condition to fast. Like, so for example, if you're a female who has very low body fat percentage, I would consider not fasting, because it's probably going to dysregulate your hormones. um, Go ahead.
I'm glad you bring this up because I think that a vast majority of my listeners are women. We've talked about intermittent fasting, but I have heard that for men, intermittent fasting is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I've heard that it's actually not so great for women. Have you heard differently, or do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I have heard it. I haven't seen any like specific scientific studies on it, but just anecdotally, I have heard it a lot of times from friends and on the internet. What it seems to be is that women have different hormonal cycles, obviously, than men, and different ratios of hormones than men, uh, and just biologically, like evolutionarily, like women are to be carriers of children, of babies, to be pregnant, right? And so men don't have those requirements, and so it seems that by having by fasting excessively too much, what is that actually doing? It's sending a signal to the body that food is scarce. And if you think in the evolutionary context and biology, if food is scarce, nature doesn't want you to procreate because you then might die yourself, or the child, the newborn, might die. Nature wants to incentivize you to only procreate once there's food in abundance, adequate food to be able to support yourself and the newborns. So that's my expectation, my feeling as to why women might be more sensitive to it than men, because they would have to carry that child,
Right.
and they would need adequate food to carry that child. For males, they don't seem to be as sensitive to it. Though I can say, me personally, if I fast too much, or I'm too hypocaloric, so not enough calories each day, I definitely feel the difference in terms of the quality of my sleep.
Yeah.
I'd say my mood changes, so I'm not as happy. I'm more like focused, but not as like positive, and so on. So like I can notice these subtle changes in myself. And so I need to make sure I balance the health versus like quality of life and those around me, to make sure
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they're, yeah.
But certainly, yes, there are a lot. There's a lot of research out there. I would just caution, especially the women, look into intermittent fasting. Always talk to your doctor, because I don't. I've heard both things, right? So I know that it I know that in the sort of this biohacking community, that intermittent fasting is definitely something that people employ. We've had great podcasts on intermittent fasting here on this show, but I have also heard from some doctors who've said, I don't know if it's great for women.
Yeah. Yeah, so technically intermittent fasting would be time restricted feeding, but it would require that you're eating fewer calories than you typically would. And so if you are intermittent fast by the strict definition of the term, which means you're eating fewer calories, I can see that as being a concern for your female audience, particularly if they're not already overweight. If they're overweight, they have excess calorie storage,
Right.
and they can probably get away with it more so than thinner women can. But if you're doing time restricted feeding, where you're not reducing the calorie intake and you're just reducing the eating window, that I don't think women will be as sensitive to, hormonally speaking, because if you eat the same number of calories that you would otherwise eat, you're just eating them between 11 and 7 instead of from 9 to 7, let's say. That shouldn't really have that much of an impact. But if you're reducing your calorie intake, which naturally oftentimes happens when you're eating in a smaller window because you get fuller quicker,
Right.
then that's where there could be some trouble. So the calories, I think, are the critical issue for that.
Thank you for clarifying that. I really appreciate that, because that makes much more sense with the time restricted. When you said that, my mind went to intermittent fasting, but it's not the same thing. And boy, 11 to 7 does seem very doable. In the outside windows, can you still be drinking water?
Yes,
Or is it
yes, of
okay?
course,
So just
definitely.
no food, but you can be drinking water throughout.
You
Okay.
can have water. You can even have black coffee, right? So
Yeah.
not with the
Not
milk,
my
or
latte.
not the
Not my
latte.
morning
Yes,
latte.
but
Got
black
it.
coffee, you can probably even throw some stevia in there, right? So it's 0 calorie, doesn't raise your blood glucose. So if you want it a little bit sweet, but yeah, none of the creamers or milks in there.
Okay, so in addition to diet, what are some other behavioral changes that we could be making to sort of help turn back that biological clock?
So within the topic of diet is the food itself that you're eating, right? So
Okay.
I'll just say the obvious stuff is like minimize processed foods, eat as much stuff straight from the earth as you can. Don't go excessive with meats, especially red meats. In fact, the best diet you can follow, or the two best diets, I should say, the most commonly known one is the Mediterranean diet, which is the eating style of Mediterranean regions. But then we have on our website the NOVOS longevity diet, which takes the Mediterranean diet as its foundation and then makes some tweaks to it based on the latest research to improve it even further. So we would suggest people take a look at the NOVOS longevity diet, but Mediterranean diet is something that is, I think most people would enjoy eating in the first place, right?
Right.
It's a very satisfying diet, and it's not so restricted like something like a ketogenic diet might be. So then beyond diet, obviously exercise. Now the question is, how much are you going to exercise, and what is the ideal versus like the minimum effective dose? So the ideal would be that you're weightlifting, let's just say 3 days per week. You are doing some form of cardio, ideally every day. Now, that cardio doesn't have to be high intensity or high heart rate zone in cardio every day. So, in other words, zone 2 cardio, which is when your heart rate is I believe around 70% of your max heart rate in that neighborhood. If you're doing that for 25 minutes a day is the approximate minimum that you want to do. But if you can do even more than that, great. It's not really putting that much stress on your body, but it is very healthy to be in that zone 2. So doing as much of that as you are willing to do, but at least about 25 minutes per day. Is going to, it's like Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule. You're going to put in 20% of the effort and get 80% of the benefits. When it comes to longevity and slowing down aging, you'll largely get that from doing the zone 2 cardio every day, plus the weightlifting.
Is zone 2, are we talking about like a brisk walk? Is that a jog, for most of us?
It's going to depend on your fitness levels. For some who are not particularly fit, that's just going to be a brisk walk, right? So a way to think about it is you're breathing heavily, but you can still breathe with your mouth closed, and you can have a conversation with somebody. Like you can say a full sentence without being winded, but when you finish that sentence, you're going to need to take a gasp of air, right? So you're like in that range. And so obviously, if you have something like an Apple Watch or a heart rate monitor, you can actually track and see which, there you go. So you can easily see what heart rate zone you are in when you use the fitness setting on the Apple Watch. But otherwise, that simple test of like, can I say a sentence, and can I do this with my nose closed? But still feeling the pressure of faster breathing, that's probably getting to that zone 2.
Amazing. So we're looking at what, like 120, 140 minutes a week? You said about 20 minutes a day?
I believe the exact number I calculated was like 23 minutes, but I just round up to 25 minutes a day.
25 minutes a day. Okay. 7 days a week.
Yeah. I mean, if you take a day off here and there, that's fine. Like I personally work out 6 out of 7 days per week. And then one day on Sunday is my day of rest, but I'll still walk a good amount, or I'll do like a leisurely bike ride. So I might not be in zone 2, but I'm physically active. I'm still moving. I'm not laying on the couch all day long. So you don't have to be like perfect about it, but yeah, most days, 5-6 days a week, if you're doing that, that's great. And that's like the minimum effective dose for like slowing down aging. I think everyone can do it. They just need to form the habit to do it. Like I, for example, every morning I will do a light jog to be in zone 2 cardio. And I'll listen to a podcast, for example, right? So that's like, instead of sitting at home listening to a podcast, like I do it by, doing a light jog. So try to create like a ritual out of it, something that you enjoy doing while doing that jog, which will then increase the likelihood that you'll adhere to it.
Okay. So I want to make sure that we have time for some of these supplements, because, that's a lot of what I think people are looking towards these days is, in addition to having a good diet, in addition to having, getting proper amount of exercise, getting enough sleep, what are some of the new technologies that are out there? And I know NOVOS has 2 products here. You've got Core and NOVOS Boost. I want to make sure we get to talk about these. So tell us a little bit about this supplementation, why we need it, what are things that we should be taking?
Sure. So let me set the context first. So people get confused about supplements, and sometimes they think NOVOS is a multivitamin, and they say, what's the difference between a multivitamin and this? So the context is, we think of supplements in the form of general health supplements. This is the stuff that you need just to be generally healthy. This is what the government has set an RDA for. It's like vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin A, magnesium, potassium, the B vitamins, and so on, right? And this you can get from a multivitamin. You can get it from the foods that you eat. And we do suggest that everyone look into supplementation, because almost definitely you're not getting adequate nutrients just from your diet alone. No matter how healthy you eat, myself included, I still need to supplement. That's general health supplements. Then you have targeted supplements for specific goals. So you have like maybe a pre-workout supplement or a post-workout supplement. Maybe you have a a supplement focused on reducing your anxiety or just keeping you calm or helping you sleep at night. And then you have the category of longevity supplements. And this is where NOVOS specializes. So we focus on creating formulations that are going to slow down your biological pace of aging. And the way that we do it, the way we approach it, is based on what's known as the mechanisms of aging, or put another way, the 12 biological causes of aging. These are the causes that scientists over more than a decade of work have put together as the reasons from a microscopic level why we age. These are the things that start to go wrong biologically as we age, and we want to slow down their degradation as much as possible, which if we can do that across all of these different hallmarks simultaneously, we're going to stand the best chance at slowing down the aging process because they're all interconnected. They feed off of each other. And if you only slow down one of them, you're not going to have that much of an impact compared to if you slow down all of them. Think of the analogy of a car, an old car with like tires that are flat and rust all over them, and the engine doesn't have oil in it. If you just fill the tires up, you're not going to get very far. But
Right.
if you clean up everything simultaneously, that's when you're really getting the car in good condition to drive again. So we are the first company, the only company to create a formula to address all 12 of these hallmarks simultaneously across all industries, including biotech and pharma. We're over the counter, of course, but we're the first company to ever do this. We have a scientific advisory board of scientists from Harvard and MIT and the Salk Institute that study aging and helped us with this formulation. We filed for patents on this formulation. And we've done a number of different scientific tests on the formulation and case studies. So, for example, a case study we did, we administered NOVOS Core and Boost to the participants, and 73% of them slowed down their biological pace of aging by a statistically significant margin. So it wasn't coincidental. In fact, the p-value for the geeks out there who want to know the probability that it was just a coincidence versus it being the supplement itself was 0.001. Typically in science, you need it to be 0.05. So this was 50 times more reliable than the typical standard for scientists to conclude that something was coming from the intervention, in this case being the NOVOS supplements. And 0% of people accelerated their aging, which is also important to note because you have these stressors in life, right? And different things, whether it be literally stress or excess drinking or not eating healthy or whatever it might be. You would expect some people would have accelerated, but nobody accelerated. Everyone either stayed the same or the large majority actually slowed down their pace of aging. So that was the case study. We have clinical trials underway. We've done in vitro studies to show that we reduce DNA damage from irradiation. We reduce cellular senescence. These are important for skin health, right? So DNA damage is what really starts to break down the collagen and the matrices in our face, and then we start to wrinkle and our skin starts to age. And we reduced DNA damage in an in vitro study by administering NOVOS Core. And we also reduced senescent cell footprints. So senescent cells are these zombie cells that start to accumulate as you get older. Typically, it's that the cell is damaged, it's not functioning properly, there might be DNA damage, it might actually even be a cancerous cell. And so the body will actually turn that cell senescent. It kind of arrests that cell. But the problem is that cell secretes inflammatory molecules that cause nearby cells to get damaged and then become senescent too. So as we age, that increases exponentially. It's one of the top targets for skincare companies is to reduce senescence in skin because it leads to the rigidity of the skin. And then again, wrinkles can form from it. So we found in a study done at Newcastle University that we were able to reduce the size of senescent cells by approximately 50% or so. Presumably would also reduce the progression of senescent cells because of the DNA protection that I mentioned earlier. So we're just getting started with the studies, but so far they're all very positive in our favor for NOVOS doing something significant for the aging process.
Amazing. And there is a lot of talk right now about NNN. I know that there's some talk that the FDA is trying to turn this into a drug. Are you worried about that at all?
So there's only so much I can say. It's technically there is a scientist, a well-known scientist in the longevity field who is a founder of a company that is trying to monopolize this substance and make it prescription only. So
Right.
this person has talked a lot about NMN and brought the public's attention to it. And then multiple companies, not only us, but others have invested a lot of money into
Yeah.
building out the product and marketing the product and getting it into the hands of consumers only for this person and the company they're affiliated with technically to try to work through the FDA through a loophole to try to take it off the market. The FDA in closed door discussions has said that it's not a matter of safety. It is simply a commercial topic. So
Yeah.
we'll see where it goes, but we're continuing to sell it for as long as we're able to, and hopefully it doesn't turn into a legal matter. But if it is, we're ready to protect our consumers' right to be able to purchase this natural substance, which I should mention is in our bodies, right? We
Yeah.
produce NMN naturally. It's also in our food supply, like tomatoes have NMN in them, but the levels decline as we get older. And so we don't believe it's fair for a biotech company to be able to monopolize it and make it prescription only when it is something found in nature and in our bodies.
No, and I wish we had more time to get into this. Can you quickly go over NMN and some of the benefits? I know that I want to be mindful of your time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So NMN is a precursor for another molecule in our bodies called NAD plus. And NAD is a molecule that's responsible for many different processes. So being a precursor, NMN fuels the creation of the NAD. And the NAD is involved in many different processes, including the production of sirtuins, and sirtuins can repair DNA, right? So when you're out in the sun and the UV rays are damaging your DNA and causing mutations, we actually have mechanisms in our body to be able to go and repair that DNA, rescue that DNA to prevent it from turning into, in the worst case, into like a carcinoma, right? Into a melanoma. So NAD is the fuel essentially for those sirtuins. So that's one thing it does. But NAD is also involved in the Krebs cycle. So you might remember from high school biology that the Krebs cycle is the process through which our bodies produce energy. So you take those carbohydrates, that protein to a lesser extent, but still you can get energy from certain forms of protein and fat. And the Krebs cycle is what is then producing ATP, which is the energy currency that our cells use, our brain uses, our heart uses to be able to perform their functions. And so NAD is a critical component of that. So other benefits can include improvements in energy. There's research being done finding reductions in, or I should say improvements in health span. So different aspects of the aging process to be able to improve healthy living essentially over the long term is some of the promise that the NMN molecule holds.
And I thought that there was a lot of promising research in the field of Alzheimer's, and that's sort of where this drug battle is kind of coming in. So listen, for my listeners out there, Chris maybe can't say this. I'm not a doctor by any means, but I've done some research. This seems like a very, very promising, I don't know, would you call it a supplement?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a supplement.
It is a supplement. So it's a promising one. I would say get it while you can. And NOVOS Core certainly has, right, the NOVOS Boost has a very high quality, reputable one. You can read all about it on their blog and on their website. You know, Chris, I want to thank you so much. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about this. I think that we are at the start of that longevity is going to become very mainstream in the very near future. If people want to know more about NOVOS, where can they go?
So they can go to novoslabs.com. We're also on all of the social networks as NOVOS Labs. And then me personally, I also have a blog, Slow My Age, where I post my results and my lifestyle hacks and so on. It's a little bit more geeky, not as mainstream as the NOVOS website. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter as Slow My Age as well.
I want to thank you so much for being on with us today. This is so awesome. I mean, I'm just fascinated. I got to check out your blog. Definitely check this out. If you have questions you want me to pass on to Chris, I'm always happy to do so. You can email me at hello@artbeautypodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Art Beauty Podcast. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday. Bye.